When it comes to marriage, our culture loves the idea of finding the perfect person. We want the fairy tale, the effortless connection, and a relationship without conflict. But the truth is, a strong marriage isn't something you simply find, it's something you forge. Today we're talking about why the heat and pressure in your relationship aren't signs of failure, but the very tools God uses to make you stronger together. I'm Bryan Evans.
I'm Rodney Thrift.
And I'm Renee Thrift.
This is DC Table Talk. Welcome back to the table. We are so excited because we have both Pastor Rodney and Renee with us today. Renee, welcome back to the podcast. You were just at the table a few weeks ago in episode 9, and now you're back. We're glad you agreed to come back.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, Bryan.
Man, I'm just glad that she decided to come back and hang out with us. A couple of more weeks out. She'll be here for Mother's Day as well. After Mother's Day, it's going to be a special day. So what's going on? But I think the table's way better when she's here. So it's exciting to have us in the room and ready to go today.
I think it's so much better when she's here for sure. This past Sunday, you two shared the stage for part 4 of our Forge series. And you brought a very incredibly powerful word on being forged in our marriage. You gave us a soul tattoo right out of the gate. Strong marriages aren't found, they're forged. And you also talked about how every marriage experiences heat and pressure from miscommunication and just the heavy stress of life. So why do we tend to panic when the heat gets turned up in our marriage, and how do we shift our mindset to see it as a forging process rather than just another breaking point?
It's good to be back talking about being forged. I think most people panic because we've been taught, whether from culture or just expectation, that if something feels hard, something must be wrong. But what we see in Scripture, biblically, pressure isn't a sign of something is broken. It's often a sign something's being built. So it's just a little bit of different perspective on things there. So when you think about a wedding ring, we talked about it a little bit Sunday, but when you think about a wedding ring, it didn't start looking like that. It started as raw material, right? Full impurities. It had to go through heat for those impurities to rise to the surface. And I think marriage is the same way. The heat doesn't create the issues. It reveals what's already there. And so we talked about the passage in Proverbs 27:17 of iron sharpening iron. And we learned a few things from a couple of passages up above that as well. But the sharpening doesn't happen without some friction.
And let me just say, I think if you would have been the one reading verses 15 and 16 there, you might have gotten some trouble with that one.
I'm so glad it wasn't me. It was so good to have Renee with me.
Thanks, guys. One of the reasons I think we take being forged and friction and all of the things we talked about, I think some of us were not raised to think that conflict is sometimes good. We were all raised, a lot of us, in a way to think that conflict is bad and a negative thing. And there's good, healthy conflict. It's the way we grow and learn one another too. And so that's one of the things I thought about when we were studying for this as well. I also think that God doesn't waste anything. And so even when we go through these hard times, whether it's our own failures, He allows us to grow closer to Him, and He's able to reveal His plan for our lives. And I just think that we have to trust God in these seasons.
Yeah, I can think back, and I remember going to school with some friends who, one in particular, who I remember he actually said one day that his parents fight all the time. That's all he ever heard was them fighting. And growing up, my parents usually hid that from me and my brother. Like they kind of handle things behind closed doors. And the problem with if your kids see you fighting all the time, but there's no resolution to it, they don't see you resolve things, it's not a very good way to train them in how to treat their spouse growing up either, I feel like.
Yes.
It's always fun to me when you two co-communicate. You're on the stage together. Your dynamic is great, especially when Renee calls you out, Pastor Rodney, for not following directions. And I've been there and done that. But whenever two people share a message, the clock moves twice as fast. And I know you both had a lot more in your notes that you could share. Since we don't have much of a ticking clock here on the podcast, what is something about the marriage forge that you really wanted to unpack on Sunday, but you just ran out of time?
So we talked about the Ecclesiastes 4 passage 9 through 12. We were talking about two are better than one. And then, of course, that verse 12 ends with a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. I think it's very important that we would understand, we didn't get a lot of time on this, that, marriage is never designed for us to stand alone, but under pressure, it was designed for us to stand together. And one of the things that I put out, and I've already received, had some guys talking to me about this, but it's that whole thing of kingdom math, that what we have is like, I'm going to give my 100%. Renee's going to give her 100%. God will give his 100+%. And then we're going to have like 300+%, as we're working through this. And so we have to be able to shift our mindset. Marriage isn't primarily about happiness. And I think sometimes goes back to the way you started. It's like this fairy tale concept, but it's really truthfully, it's about strength. And if we're working with people, understanding the power of strength, so happiness will come and go, and we know that, but strength is what carries us through the seasons. And I think we have to realize that over and over and over again, because God didn't design marriage just to make us happy. He designed it to make us stronger together. And so as we're walking through this, I think for me, one thing that I wasn't able to point out, and we always walk people through this when we're talking about 7 marriage killers, is we talk about the power of covenant versus the power of a contract. I'm always talking to people, young couples that are getting married, anybody getting married, but specifically with young couples, especially in a divorce culture, that 1 out of every 2 marriages ends in divorce, and how strong that is that we talk about contract versus the covenant, and we know the covenant is a forever covenant. And we don't have time to do a deep dive on that today, but we're making a covenant with each other, but we're also making a covenant with God, and God's making a covenant with us in the marriage. And so there's so much power in that as we look at that threefold piece, and we help couples work through that, because the key is what we're leaving, right? And it's legacy. We want there to be a legacy in their marriage. Legacy will be kids, of course, grandkids, and on the story goes, and a legacy filled with great things in the marriage, as well as the things that are being forged. So I think that's, for me, that's some of that. Again, marriage doesn't just reveal your spouse, it reveals you. And there are times where we're being forged as an individual, and then we're also being forged as a couple.
It's good you mentioned that, because I know in my own marriage was actually, like, there have been times where we'll have to deal with something, usually maybe in me, but it's things I never realized was inside of me until it came out in that moment. And it may not be a pretty sight at the moment, but because I actually said, hey, well, what's this? It gave me a chance to kind of step back and say, okay, this is a problem. We need to address this. We need to fix this. And so I feel like it makes me better as a person, even just that one level, because those things come to the surface, I can deal with them and get them out of the way. And so those impurities you talk about coming up to the surface, and I can get rid of it.
That's good. Early in our marriage, I never realized I had a bad temper. Growing up, I didn't express that. And so early in our marriage, I realized, oh, I can do this. I can be angry, or I can, act up and not, have consequences or whatever. And so I know we talk a lot about Rodney's temper, but in reality, he's not alone. And like you're saying, it was marriage that brought that impurity to the top that the Lord's really had to work in me as well. I haven't had to deal with it quite as long or as often as Rodney, but it was there, and it was marriage that brought it out. So you're right, Bryan.
As we're kind of walking through this too, we looked at several passages of scripture. I would have stopped here, but we were moving in that message. But in that Colossians passage in chapter 3, verse 13, it says, make allowance for each other's faults. The New Living Translation does. And so I think, like, we have to really make allowance for each other's fault. They just throw that out there, right? And so as we're doing that, though, the other piece of the puzzle is, and forgive anyone who offends you. Well, in this relationship, it's going to be each other, right, as we're walking through it. And I think we have to take that into consideration and remember that we are valuing others above ourselves. And in our marriage, it's I'm valuing her above me. And so I, over and over again, for people that are listening, if that hasn't been what you've been doing, then I would say is to maybe talk to your spouse. Let's have a peaceful conversation and maybe ask the questions and then be able to work out from under that. And we always say it because we've done it. You might have to have somebody walk in that with you. But at the same time, if both people are trying to win, the marriage loses.
That's good.
But healthy marriages aren't built on being right. And I'm a person that likes to be right. And so I have to be careful with this. But healthy marriages are not built on being right. They're built on being unified. Because our marriage should be a tool for evangelism. People should see us and want to have what we have, in other words, as we're walking through it. And so those are just some pieces that we looked at. And we could have easily, and hopefully we'll get a couple more of these on, throughout even this year where we're on stage talking about marriage, because I think it's so important right now.
That's good. That's good. And so I want to take a minute just to get into the practical tools of the forge you mentioned. You talked about the hammer. I really like the way you went with this. The hammer represents our communication, our truth, and then the water, which is the cooling off and forgiveness. And you said something that hit pretty hard. I actually heard a few in the audience and the congregation. You said truth should shape your spouse, not shatter them. And you explained how quench and seal in water is required so it doesn't become brittle and break. And so for the couple that's listening to this who just keeps hammering each other with words and they never hit the water, how do they practically build a reset system to cool down and actually forgive each other?
Great question. I think it goes back to we were talking about in Ephesians, speak the truth in love, figuring out how to speak the truth in love. I can speak the truth, but at the same time, it has to be in love. And that goes back to my favorite thing that I'm always working on. It's not just what you say, it's how and when. We have to get that inside of us, and I've had to learn it and am still learning it. But Renee says I'm better at it, so I'll take her at her word. But because everybody shouldn't hold their breath when we come in the door, or or when we walk into the room. It should be, I want them to be joyful when I come in the room, and so. But a lot of times, because of, how they may have been treated by someone, then that's the case. So a lot of this goes back to communication, Bryan. And as we're working with couples, communication is that first piece that we get. It's the sure foundation.
That's good. Where the water comes in is no marriage can survive constant heat without cooling. And I think about that when we've been through tense situations. If the stress is just always there and you just feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time, that's so unhealthy. And so we have to be able to find that place to communicate, to share, to open up, but also to just have a reset and to be able to just get back to the basics of why we're together and love each other without all of the tension all the time. And, there's been a couple times through our marriage where I've thought, why would Rodney even want to come home? Because it's just so tense. And that's not healthy for any of us. And so we have to be able to find a time to cool off and reset. And for some of us in those seasons where we can't fix it, it's getting away, getting out of town for a night, or just being able to go back to some of the basics of why we love each other and what brought us together. And like Rodney said earlier, our covenant to one another and to God. And then sometimes it is just being able to forgive one another and move on and not be right, not be the one that's right. And just ask the Lord what is his will for the situation, not my will. And so I think, practically those are just a few steps that we can take. And sometimes just getting away and not talking about the problem and being able to laugh and just relax makes a big difference practically.
Yeah, I think there's that pause piece that we have to hit the pause button, and we did talk about that Sunday. You could go back and listen to the message on that one. But at the same time, there needs to be a pause in the midst of what's going on. And then also out from under that is we would say breathe. In other words, if I was talking to somebody that was having a panic attack or something, I would want them to breathe and settle down. And we would probably start doing some, in the mental health world, we would call it box breathing. And we would start working with them on that. But I think it's the same way in our marriage, that we would want to be able to breathe a little bit, and that to de-escalate the issue, the problem. Definitely do not want to do this in front of my kids. If I have kids, I want to make sure that we would do these things prayerfully in private. We reward in public. We rebuke in private if there's a need for that. But the same case here, even if we're not rebuking, but we don't want to do this in front of our kids. Back to your story, Bryan, about your friend, because that's where we would say, let's just step away let's just set 10 o'clock tomorrow morning or 5 o'clock, tomorrow afternoon, and with that goal of restoration and not retaliation. Because we're very good as humans that we want to retaliate, but God's all about restoring something or reconciliation. And so I think we have to be very, very careful there. And the other thing is that passage we used about not letting the sun go down while you're still angry. And we kind of we were laughing about that one and how it works. But the reality on that is that doesn't mean you solve everything instantly. But it means you do not let things stay unresolved. I think that's where we get in trouble, is when all these little things are unresolved, and then all of a sudden there's a boom, something happens, because this is what we know, right? If we stop hammering without cooling, we will eventually break something. And because, strong marriages, strong marriages aren't the ones that never fight. They're the ones that know how to recover. And we want to make sure that we recover well.
Oh, yeah. And in our marriage, early on, I was always in a very similar way where I wanted to go and fix the issue right then because of that verse. And there were times I literally would chase Ashley through the house to the bathroom. She's trying to get away from the situation, calm down a little bit, and not say something she doesn't mean, that she'll regret. And I'm following her the whole way through, and she's telling me, hang on, just stop, just give me a minute. And when I finally learned that concept of just take a break, breathe, we're not going to let it go completely. We're going to come back to it. And I think that kind of goes back to the second half of the pause thing you mentioned. I don't want people to miss this, because not only do you pause the conversation right then, but you go ahead and schedule when you're going to talk about it again.
Yes.
At a time where you're both are available. You're not trying to cook dinner while you're talking about it. You're not trying to tend to the kids while you're talking about it. But you have a time where you guys just sit down together, face to face, and say, okay, let's figure this thing out. And it's not so you can build your case against the other person. That's not what that's for.
That's right.
It's not about trying to prove that you're right. It's trying to find a solution to the problem.
Right.
And one thing we did that helped out is if they had an issue, we would name the issue. That way, I'm not the issue, she's not the issue. The problem is the actual issue.
That's good.
And we'll say, hey, we're going to take care of one recently was Sally. We're going to take care of Sally. Sally's been a problem. How to deal with Sally. And so when we did that, and that's helped make it funny in some ways too. It helps kind of cut through some of the tension. But it's so much better than trying to just hammer it out right then and there, and come to a conclusion that's probably the wrong one that we don't want to deal with.
Right. That's good.
And so you close the message by talking about grace. I think grace is very important. And you would say it's the glue that holds the forged marriage together. Because we didn't marry perfect people. I know I'm not perfect. Ashley's not perfect. None of us are perfect. We marry people that we have to forgive daily. And so before we leave the table, let's give the couples that are listening a challenge for this week.
So this week, take an honest look at your marriage. Not to criticize, but to grow. Ask yourself, are we letting pressure divide us, or are we letting God use it to strengthen us? And some practical steps in that are to create a reset system. How do you pause? How do we communicate? How do we come back together? And I would say when you are alone, process through these steps, and then when you come together, process through them together. And let each person have a say in how you create this whole system. What works for one couple may not work for another couple. So you need to work on what works for you.
That's good. And remember, strong marriages aren't found, they're forged. So Pastor Rodney, take us out.
Yep. Want to say a couple of thought things before we close out. One would be, if you're listening to this today and you were listening to us talk about this Sunday, and you thought, man, I really do need some help in my marriage. What do I need to do? I think I would call the church office and let us help you out, or let us find you some help with someone to be able to help you get these things worked out so you can move forward in life and leave the legacy that we talked about. And remember, we'll close out this series. I got a great message, I think, coming in this week as we're looking at Palm Sunday and getting ready for Easter. I'm very excited about that as well. So as always, pull up a chair. There's always room at the table. Sunday starts the conversation, but right here is where it continues.